Hello everybody, welcome to Build or Buy. I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Gil Boyd, and this is all about the Ryzen. You guys are amazing. I want to thank everybody for subscribing, and thanks for joining us on this journey to build a Threadripper. Now this is the second Threadripper we're getting ready to build, and we've got a list of our components here so you can take a look. We're going to be building a Threadripper and something a little bit more, we think, bang for the buck, we hope. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in Threadripper or any platform, whether you build a computer or buy a computer, right now for resource allocation, this is the place to be. Just remember that. You want to build on the X399 chipset. Now, there was a suggestion that Sue and John had, which I totally agree with and I hadn't thought of and hadn't mentioned it before. I would suggest, as a start, use PC Part Picker. It's a great way to start. PCPartPicker.com. You can go and you can see all the X399 chipset motherboards. You can choose by brand, you can choose by price, or you can choose by what has the best feedback from users. But they're all on the X399 chipset. Then you can choose your processor. Now, for example, there's a deal. By the time you see this video, it'll probably be gone. But there was a deal at, I believe it was Newegg, like $150 off on a 1950. Now, this is a 1920. The reason we bought that, we thought it was the best bang for the buck at the time. And because I suspect we may be building more Threadrippers, that gives us a first generation Threadripper that we can use to upgrade, if we need to, some of the other motherboards that aren't able to accept the latest chip based on the BIOS. But from our perspective, that makes sense. From your perspective, if you can get the 1950 for a little bit more than the 1920, that's the way to go. But anyway, it all starts with the Threadripper. That's what we're building. That's what we're going to show you. But the motherboard we're focusing on this time, the Gigabyte X399 Designare EX. This time we're going with a little bit less powerful power supply. We're still using the EVGA G3 because that's the biggest power supply we can get in the smallest package. Now, if we went with like an EVGA G2, there's a deal on those right now. It's a bigger power supply. But I can buy a 1300 watt power supply for less than I paid for this. You got to watch for the deals. PC Part Picker may be able to help you to solve some of that. And the case we're going with, now this goes back to the video we did when we built the Ryzen. The thing that's always been in the back of my mind has been airflow. It's not about keeping the CPU cool, because we're going to use a Noctua that's an air cooler. And yes, this case will accommodate a liquid cooler, but it's all about keeping the video card cool. We're not using a regular video card. We're using a more pro-end video card. We're using the AMD. And because of a comment that a user left on the specs that we did when we did and we'll do that with the Threadripper later, where we did the Cinebench score, that's always been in the back of my mind about cooling. And this case is the Corsair 750D Airflow. Now, I'd never been interested in new cases because cases to me are kind of like, for those of you that remember, when we went from AT to ATX, I had a bunch of AT style cases that I said, oh my gosh, I got to get rid of. They were wonderful cases. I'd still be using them today, but the format changed. So I've had the same thing with a lot of the ATX cases I've been using, but they don't give the airflow that this does. So there's only two cases in the category, and again, PC Part Picker, you can look through like 4 pages of cases that are great for this. This case will accommodate an air cooler or a liquid cooler. It has 3 fans. We take those 3-pin fans, we were going to remove them, and we're going to put in 3 4-pin fans. So that way, with the 2 thermistors, we can tell the motherboard BIOS how to control those fans based on the heat. And these are going to be Noctua industrial fans. We're going to have the Noctua cooler. It includes 1 fan. We put the second fan up in the stack, so we're going to have maximum airflow. And the video card we're going to use on this is the same video card we used in the Ryzen, which we've had great results with. Now, for those of you that want to use an NVIDIA card, more power to you. It's just hard for me to justify for the cost for the processing power. For those of you that are doing processing of video, the NVIDIA is the way to go. But for my preference for bang for the buck, the AMD Radeon Pro WX7100, that's a great place to be. We used this card in the Ryzen, so now we're going to use it in the Threadripper. In the previous Threadripper, we used the 9100. So kind of in the same family, same driver model. It's bulletproof, and besides, your rendering is done 90% by the CPU. Your special effects are done by your video card. And everybody, New Blue Effects, Boris, and some of the other special effects, everybody wants you to use an NVIDIA GPU. So I'm just saying, I know what the things are, but I'm telling you what we use and why. Bang for the buck. So as we go through this, we're also stepping up a little bit in RAM, but we're stepping down in quantity. The previous build we had 64 gigs. In this build we're going to do 32 gigs. In the previous build we had a 1 terabyte NVMe drive. In this build is going to be a 2 terabyte. And that's the largest NVMe drive you can get. Now, going forward after we finish this, we will probably take up the option to install a RAID card. We've done a video on a RAID card you can take a look at. That was the ASUS version 101. The ASUS version 2 card has now come out, and that's probably the one we'll look at. There's actually 3 changes on the card. We'll get into that more later, but I want to go through some of the things on these parts to give you kind of a top down what this is all about. And the first thing we need to do is we're going to from a different approach, and that's based on the comments you guys have left. We need to inventory our components for this motherboard, because if there's anything in it that's a deal breaker, number one, the motherboard's got to be there, and there's no seal on the box. We'll go through that. There's no anti-static bag. We'll go through that. There's no seal on the anti-static bag, which is really annoying, but that's just the way it is. But we will have an inner box, and that inner box holds that motherboard tight. And to get the motherboard out of the inner box, you have to break that box. So we're going to pay attention to that. We want to pay attention to the socket, and as we get ready to install the CPU, that's when we look at the socket. Now, once we get to that point, we also need to inventory the components in the box of the accessory items. The only thing to me in there that's a deal breaker is I want to make sure the screws are there to install the NVMe drives. If they're not, that would be a real bummer. If I'm missing the antennas, it doesn't matter. I'll give you the specs on that. And another user pointed out, and I appreciate him doing that, on the last video, the way the specs are written about these antennas, I'll give you the correct information at the end of this video on some other antennas you might want to upgrade to. And depending on what direction you go, you might decide, hey, I like the wireless, and oh, by the way, I'd like better wireless, and oh, by the way, we're going to upgrade that wireless card like we did in the last one, for 2 reasons. 1, we're going to have faster internet, we'll double the speed, and 2, we're also going to be able to go from, I believe it's Bluetooth 4.2 to Bluetooth 5. So now, if there's any point of contention and we start having latency issues, then the wireless is the first thing we have to shut off. Can't do that in the BIOS. That's controlled by Device Manager, but we're going to do that. Now, because we're going to upgrade the wireless card, Windows will freak out when we install. So you have to remember, we have a video up about slipstreaming the Windows drivers for the Intel wireless card so Windows will not go blue screen on you. You might want to take a look at that. So stay with us now. We'll get started going through the parts. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Processor, extra cooling fan, CPU cooler, video card, motherboard, NVMe boot drive, RAM, power supply, and case. Thought we'd spin the case around so you can take a look at it. Here's the bottom, and we'll have the power supply blowing in. For those of you like it blowing out, I like it blowing in. There's also a filter here on the bottom you can pop out. Power supply right there. Our I/O panel on the back. A couple of knockouts if you do a external liquid cooler. And the rear fan. And oh, by the way, that rear fan has to come out so we can slide the motherboard out. All the pins are already set on the motherboard, but the center pin is a centering pin. So we'll pop that fan out and that'll slide right in. And you can see there's extra room in the top, so you got plenty of room for a cooler. You've also got this magnetic top that pops loose. And the airflow means that there's better airflow. And this is pretty easy to clean. We'll spin it around to the front. We have 2 USB 2 ports, 2 USB 3 ports, audio and headphones on the front. In the front center on the top, and I like this that the buttons and everything is on the front, not on the edges, not on the top. Sometimes I stack cases. 2 USB 2, 2 USB 3, power button. There's the power LED, the hard drive LED, they're both white. And also the front panel also pops off. Touch latches. There's the 2 fans. And I'm going to show you how to take those front panel. This is the first case I've ever had that I've never had to take the front off of to get the front panel out. But with this case, I can pop those out from the inside, which is kind of cool. Around to the bottom, you can see where you could put theoretically a couple of fans, but you're only going to have one because of the power supply. Well, you could put 2 right there. Here's where the power supply goes. There's also 2 cages inside. I'll remove one of those cages because I like everything out the front. And these are 140 millimeter fans, by the way, so that's pretty cool. Larger fans, move more air, make less noise. Remember the days when we had the little 80 millimeter fans? We had to have a lot of 80 millimeter fans, and boy, were they noisy. Then we went to 120 millimeter fans. Because this case is a little bit thicker, it will accommodate the Noctua cooler we're going to use. So I kind of give you an overview of the components, what's involved. The heart of a computer is the RAM, motherboard, and processor. Number one is the chipset. The chipset is the foundation that everything else is built on. But you need a good case to put things in. And there was, I believe it's called Intooth. They make a case that was kind of curious, but I didn't like the way the drives were set inside. There was no way to remove that area to have more space. This makes this the best case, in my opinion, for maximum airflow. Also maximum components. And again, these three I'll pull out from the inside. There's two little clips in there. You just pop them. I'll pop all three of those out while I have it open. It's real easy. This is the first case I've never had to take the front off of. And these two fans I want to mention right quick is if you replace these, first of all, these are stock fans. There are no LEDs. The LEDs you see in the pictures are for the pretty lights for the video. What we did for the video was to turn this thing around so you can see the components. That was our contribution to technology and our wow factor. But when you replace these fans, you can take them out in either order, but put the top fan in first because it tucks up under the edge just a little bit, and then put in the bottom fan. Otherwise, you're going to have a bear of a time. Been there, done that. So just that little bit of advice. And the fans we're going to use, since they're the Noctua industrial fans, they're the black fans. LEDs don't do anything for performance. This is for rendering audio and for rendering video. Now the first Threadripper we built, we will be doing video with that. With this Threadripper, we're going to be doing audio. So that's why we need a larger boot drive. We'll put all of our instruments and music software on that drive. And I have a machine, the 8350, with a 1 terabyte SSD M.2 drive, and it ran out of space. Really surprised me. So that's why we've gone for a 2 terabyte. So let's get started. You know, some of the cases do a better job of this than others, but I wish they do something about these thumb screws. There have been cases where the thumb screws stay with the rear panel. This does not. When the thumb screws come out, they come out. Now inside the case, since I've taken this apart, you can see we've got a nice area to work in. This fan's got to come out, and I'm going to take this cage out because that cage is going to be in my way. I will leave this cage internal. We'll have 1 or 2 drives. We still got room on the back for the 4 SSDs. And of course, we're going to have 1 boot drive on the computer. And something else I want to point out on the motherboard that I didn't realize with the other X399, with our Gigabyte X399 RS Extreme, and I would expect it to be the same with his X399 Designare EX. There are 3 M.2 slots. They are specified to work with 3 NVMe drives. We had another user that commented that he tried to put M.2 SSDs on there, and I wouldn't have known this unless someone told me because it's not in the specs. But it would not accommodate. It would not take an M.2 SSD in slot 2. So if anybody's thinking about getting this board and doing some of the upgrades, just be aware it will support 3 NVMe drives, but it will not support 3 M.2 SSD drives, the plain drives. So just want you to be aware of that. Now this set of drives, if we were to put a fan in here, we're going to remove that because we want access to be able to get the power supply in for the cables routing and all that stuff. So we're taking this other drive out. Okay, that is removed, and it sits on top of a piece of plastic. So we could put a fan there now. There's no way to put a fan in there with that sitting there. That has to come out. Now these drives can be stacked in the case, removing this base, so it's an either or. If you want to put a fan there, or if you want to have the drives. I like everything out the front, but I'm just saying. So we can see where we've removed the bottom rack right here. And now we're going to take out this fan back over here. Now the reason we're taking this fan out is so when the motherboard goes down, it'll go straight down. I need to move these cables out of the way, and right here, this pin, this is a center pin, it's the centering pin. So when the motherboard goes down, it'll go straight down. If we try to go straight down with this fan in here, it's in the way. Since we're going to be replacing the fans, it's no big deal. So it's just as easy to go ahead and do it right now. All you want to remember is when you start putting in your new fans is the direction of airflow. You want the airflow to go from front to back, and generally from inside up, since heat rises. Now, these are 600 RPM fans. Are they noisy? They're not bad. They're 3-pin fans, so they're just always on. We put in 3000 RPM 4-pin fans. Those are noisy, but not once they're controlled. And we'll keep those screws close by because we'll need those screws with the new fans, even though it comes with screws. I'll pull those cables loose. Now, go ahead and get them out of the way. This is just prepped for the case. So when it comes time to put the motherboard in, we are set. We are in business. There's the 19-pin header for USB 3. And I believe that is HD audio. one pin blanked out. Then we have our header for USB there labeled. Then we have our other various and sundry cables for hard drive LED, power switch, and then the two separate leads which will do power on the LED. And then the parts are over here. And we'll want to inventory the parts on the case, because one thing in that little box that they're not including anymore is the PC speaker. What's with that? I mean, they're inexpensive, but trying to find an extra one, usually when I buy a bag of them, you know, 10 dozen, whatever it is, because when I power a machine up, I like to hear that motherboard report those beeps. Yes, I can look at the post codes, but I like to hear those beeps. I know everything is hunky-dory. I know everything's copacetic. So I wanted to share that tidbit with you. So we got those cables loose, and I'll just set those over to the side. And while we're at it, we'll take a look right quick. Not that it matters now, but I'm curious about the parts here. Now, what you're going to find is probably 3 different types of screws. There are also some zip ties, which are no big deal. And I see some screws also for fans. I see a coarse thread. I see screws for drives, for devices that would go in the drive bays, external and internal, which is a coarse thread and a fine thread. And then of course the one key bag of bolts in here are the threads for the motherboard standoffs. The motherboard standoffs are already attached, and those are kind of real important. I'm not sure if they're coarse or fine. I'll find out when we get to that point. I expect them to be a fine thread, but I have been proven wrong. I don't remember. I know we've used this case, but I don't remember. So anyway, my point of this, there's no PC speaker in here. We have extra, so I'm not worried about it, but I just want to double check. In case anybody ever gets a used case, those things might matter to you, especially if you can get a good deal on a case. Motherboard is one thing I would not buy used, because you don't know how it's been handled. When we get ready to do the motherboard, we're going to have all of our grounding done. We're going to have gloves on, anti-static gloves. We're going to have our wrist strap on, and we're going to be grounded to a ground mat, grounded to the wall. I've already checked it and verified it. I've also checked the humidity. I know what the temperature is, so we're good to go. Now for this front, to be able to see that, I'm going to reach in and pop those out. It's kind of hard to tell, but I'm going to reach inside the case, and there's levers. So I'm going to reach for the middle one first, and I'm going to pop this center one out, and I'll show you. That's the 2 levers. You can see right there that I reached in and grabbed. Squeeze those, and that pops right out. And while I'm at it, I can go ahead and take the others out. This is all preliminary stuff, because I've got things to go in here. But it's easier to pull these out now than later, and I don't have to mess up the front. The reason I'm saying this is one of the cases we looked at before for the Threadripper. We did a video about that, Threadripper and components. We ended up not using any of those cases, because the case we were going to use that had the front on it, it wouldn't stay on. And that was just annoying. I never had a case that was so poorly made, and it was a Corsair. But this is a Corsair case. This Corsair even has feet on the rear. The first one didn't. So they're getting better. But anyway, I pulled all 3 of those out because since we use DVD Architect, we're going to have a Blu-ray drive. We're going to also have a media drive, actually 2 media drives we can pull out, a 2.5 inch and a 3.5 inch. We've got a video on that, drive bay devices. And we're also going to have USB-C on the front. We've got a video up about that for those that want to see it. So all that's going to be occupied. And I don't know if you're like me, but I was wanting 4 drive bays, but you know, if you look at it physically, there's give and take. It's kind of like on the motherboard. There's give and take. There's resource allocation. If you notice on this setup, we have 2 140 millimeter fans. Now, if we went to 120 millimeter fans, or if these fans were dropped down a little bit lower, then we could accommodate another drive bay device. But to give airflow to this drive below, these 2 fans are set up. And the screws that are set for these fans, because they go through this way and not the back, are the long screws that are in the bag of fasteners that are in with the board. So if you don't have that box of fasteners, it's going to be difficult to deal with this, so you don't want to lose those. You might have the same issue if you were trying to do the same thing on top. But normally on top, short screws, they go from the top, fans inside. Now if we were to move the fans down, the screw holes would accommodate it, but I'm going to leave the fans up the way they've got them to keep the airflow here in the bottom, where this is just straight air flowing through here. Straight airflow here, 2 fans. It would have been nice for that to have been a drive beta device, but my point is, if I move these down, I don't gain anything. I can't use the space because the way this is designed inside. And this brings up the point about the Enthu case. A lot of cases have this where this is a straight rail inside, you know, for structural integrity, I guess, and all the drives either come out this way, or for the in-through case, it looks like the drives come out this side. I don't know about you, but when I get this on the shelf, this is all I'm going to see. I'm going to see these three drives and everything that's right here in the front. I won't see anything from here, especially if there's another computer stacked next to it. So why are we pulling stuff out the sides? The lids have to be off. You have to have room to get that. So there'll be an internal drive, another internal drive, but everything else has got to come out through here. So the two fans, it'll stay like that. So I'm just saying, it'd be nice, but it is what it is. So my 2 cents worth. Okay, so we've got the case stripped, and it's ready now to receive a motherboard. So we'll set this aside and get the motherboard up here. Okay, now we got things turned around, ready to go to the next step. We got our motherboard up here located. First things first, we got to get our gloves on, got to get our anti-strap put on. It's really important, folks, to be grounded. I think that's the #1 reason people are having computers fail. These boards seem to be really sensitive to ESD. So be sure and follow all the procedures, because for those that have a motherboard that fails after a couple of months, that sure sounds like an ESD, electrostatic discharge, which causes a catastrophic failure over time. It adds up. So I am grounded and I have my strap on. So I'm in business. And just to double check, we are 31% humidity, 82 degrees. So the low is 30%, the high is 32%. We can work with that. Now, we're going to take the motherboard out. We're going to inventory, make sure everything is good. The next thing we're going to need to do is take a look at the CPU. And as we look at the socket of the motherboard, we will also then take a look at the CPU and then get those two installed. Once that's done, then we'll go after the wireless card. I'll pick the box up. You can take a look. There is no seal on that box, which is very annoying, but it is what it is. So we're going to set that down, open that up. Seems like they're selling motherboards by the pound now, because boy, these things are heavy. All we have is this plastic cover on top we're going to take off, and I'm going to turn this and orient this so it faces me according to how I'll be working with it. And some of you are going to be wondering about the socket, so let's go in on that and zoom in and see what we have. And if you can read that, that is a Foxconn socket, for those that are curious. We'll zoom out just a little bit so we can see the full socket, because this is really important, what we're getting ready to talk about now. If you'll notice on the socket, we've got these two blue tabs. We're going to need to unlock, pull this lever up. The order we install these is important, as well as the way we uninstall them. To open it, we'll follow the directions of 3, 2, 1, and to close it, we'll follow the directions of 1, 2, 3. We can use the Allen wrench that comes with the motherboard to start it, but when we start getting ready to set it, we need to use the wrench that comes with the CPU. That is a torque wrench, and that torque wrench will torque that to the correct torque it needs to be. Now, why is that important? For 2 reasons. 1, it affects how everything sets up on the slots, for the PCI Express slots. 2, it affects how the RAM is set up. Now, when we get ready to do the RAM, you'll notice the orientation. The notch on the RAM on this side is on the lower end, and the notch on this other side is on the upper end. So these locks on this side are fixed. They do not move. The locks at the top of the motherboard, those are the one that open. So for the orientation of RAM, as we install RAM, we will want to, for die 1, the very first one will be, this is the most important if you're using one stick. Then for dual channel, this second one is the second most important if you're using 2 sticks. Now when we go to die 2, we'll repeat the process and we'll put it over here in these 2 slots. Let's see. The second one and the last one, and then again here, the second one and the last one. Because we're going to do 4 channel, we're going to have 2 on this side, and we'll have 2 on this side. Let's zoom out a little on the motherboard and take a look at some of the other resources. Now, because of the architecture, any motherboard that is on the X399, the architecture is the same. What's different is resource allocation. So first you have resource allocation of the chipset, and then second you have resource allocation of the motherboard according to the chipset. We have the first PCI Express slot, 16 lane. Then I believe we have the second PCI Express slot, 16 lane. So we have, for resource allocation, we have 2 16-lane slots. The primary, that's where your video card will go, and the secondary, that's where you could install an NVMe M.2 card. Then we have 2 8-lane slots, and I believe that would be number 1, and this would be number 2. And then this last slot, even though it looks like a 16-lane slot, it's only got 4 lanes to it. Now that we could use for all kinds of things, as long as it only requires 4 PCI lanes. But if we install an NVMe card, it has to have 16 PCI lanes, so it's got to be there. Now what's curious is the way we have close proximity with the NVMe drive, the video card, the CPU cooler, and the RAM. When we install the CPU cooler, we could adjust it back, but I've got it setting by stock right up next to the video card because I like the way this touches the video card. The video card just backs up to this cooler, and as long as we stay with low profile RAM, we are good to go. Now, if you're using regular RAM, a liquid cooler is probably going to be a better option for you. That way you can do whatever you want. The height of the RAM doesn't matter. But we are using low profile RAM. Now for the power taps, we've got one 24-pin tap on this side. I'll get the motherboard out in just a minute. We've got two power taps on top, a 4-pin and an 8-pin. And a lot of times, some motherboards will have a PEG connector somewhere down here. PEG is for PCI Express graphics to give extra power to the bus in case you're doing two video cards. Now, the power supply we chose is overkill, but because of the video card, because of the I/O cards we're going to be adding, we think it's appropriate. Now, if somebody would ask me what would be the minimum size power supply to use on a Threadripper, just off the bat, I'd say 750 watts. For those that want to try smaller, more power to you. But just like your computer is on a foundation with a chipset, power is everything. And number one, you got to have a good power supply that gives you good power. And I would also recommend get a good UPS. We've got a video up on BuilderBuy about that. I'd encourage you to watch it. It's not about the software, it's about the UPS, because we use those UPSs for lots of things. For example, this video that we're recording now, all the equipment that's running is running on two UPSs. One primary for the video switch and all that equipment, and a secondary switch for when we run this computer and power it up. So just thought I'd let you know, FYI. Okay, so we're looking at the motherboard, we're inventorying that. We're going to take the inner box out, and underneath this will be the other box. Now this inner box, we have to break the seal on this inner box. Oh, this is interesting, piece of paper. Now that's curious. To avoid a blue screen after the Wi-Fi module driver installed in Windows 10 RS2, refer to the instructions below before installing the driver. Before installing Windows 10 RS2, or if Windows 10 RS2 is already installed, go to BIOS Setup, set memory interleaving. We like to keep it simple. All you have to do is do a slipstream of the drivers in Windows. We've got a video up on that because depending on the RAM you're using, depending on if you've upgraded the Wi-Fi card like we're going to do, this ain't going to cut it. And our solution is a much simpler solution. We used to do slipstreaming on Windows. We did it with Vista. We did it with Windows 7. Did it some with Windows 8. Didn't do it with Windows 10. But now we're slipstreaming drivers again until Windows gets smart enough to put those drivers in there for us. So slipstream Windows and ignore this. Just FYI. So we're going to set the motherboard aside. Now then, the box, all these pretty pieces of paper, decals, and be sure and take inventory. On the top, and I'll keep the board I'll keep the box sitting the way the board came out. See if I can hold this open. These two cables are thermistors. Those are important. That'll give us temperature on our fans so we can adjust speed. We will put those on after the fact. We don't need them on right now. We've also got some zip ties, two of them, real wide. We've got a manual and also a driver CD should be down here. Now, if you don't have a DVD, don't worry about it. You can download these drivers. You can go either way, but I will encourage you, even if you do install the drivers from the disk, you need to go to AMD's site or just do a search for X399 motherboard drivers, and you can download the motherboard drivers. You can also download the RAID drivers, and if you're using an AMD video card, go do a search for AMD video card. You can download those drivers, but you want the latest chipset drivers. It's real important. So install what's with the motherboard, then you can do the rest. Now, the default drivers that will install for the network, for the wired network, that'll get you online so you can go finish your business. But be sure and slipstream the Windows Wi-Fi drivers. So stay with us. So back to the parts. I'm going to leave that over there. That's not crucial stuff. And none of that's deal breaker stuff, but it would be annoying if it's not there. Now on this side, closest to me, let's see, we've got, well, that's curious. That's a U2 connector. It looks like it fits in an M.2 slot. That was not included with the X399 Aorus Extreme. A connector for something that we will never use. That's interesting. We have our standard SATA cables. There's 2 packs. There should be some more in here. Those look like quality SATA cables. There is a bridge connector for SLI. That's included for the 2 16-lane slot video card. So we have 3 packs of SATA cables, the bridge connector. Now, here we go with the Wi-Fi antenna. one Wi-Fi antenna with 2 leads. I've had some interesting dialogue with the user on the X399 RS Extreme about this antenna missing. He was finally able to source one, but because of his questions, it made me do some research, and the way this is identified was kind of odd. In fact, looking at the leads on this, those leads look like they are missing the connectors on the ends. So if you don't have the antenna you need, I'll put a link up to some other antennas that have a higher gain, which are separate antennas, but you need 2. I wouldn't necessarily 2 of the same, but they need to be of the same gain. So same antenna, and they also have a magnetic base. They stick anywhere, and they got big long antennas on them. They've got all the connectors with them. But I'll put up the specs on this in case you need it. If wireless is a big deal, that might be a deal breaker. But the deal breaker for me, okay, there's the Allen wrench. Here's the bag with the screws. These are the standoffs for the M.2 drives. I have enough in here in one bag for all 3 drives, 3 standoffs and 3 screws. That to me is the deal breaker. So that's there. And someone did not have on the other motherboard the G connector. This is the G connector. This is not a deal breaker at all. This is the G connector. This is something that was originally designed by ASUS, and what this is, I can take it out of the bag and show you, but what you do is you put all your I/O cables in this, and then you plug this onto the motherboard. That's the G connector. It's annoying. It's a great idea on paper, but they pop off too easy. So I just put them straight to the board. The advantage of this is if you got labels here you can read and you can see this, so you can plug all these in to this block, and then you plug that block into the motherboard. So if it's there, fine. I'm not going to be using it. I'm just saying. The other stuff that's in here, there's a connector for the lights. Won't be using that. There's another connector for lights, and there's another connector for lights. So that gives you an idea of the parts you're supposed to have. The only 2 things I'm concerned about is that wrench to get me started with the CPU, and those screws so I can get the NVMe drive installed. That's what I need. These are the 2 things I'm going to keep out of the box for now. All the rest of this stuff is irrelevant to me. But it's important to be sure and take inventory. Wherever you get your motherboard from, everything should be included. And if everything's not included, then you need to think twice about it. Because with the manufacturer, you know, you've got 30 days. And with whoever you bought it from, you've got 30 days. But if everything's not in there, the vendor won't say, well, I'll send you whatever. They'll say, send the whole thing back. And if you're already built, that's not going to work for me. So I'm just saying, if something's missing, it's a deal breaker, you're going to have to decide. Number 1, the motherboard's got to be there. Number 2, I want that Allen wrench. And number 3, I want those screws so I can put those NVMe drives in. Everything else I can deal with. So you have to consider your parameters. Okay, so we got everything out of the box. We'll move this out of the way. We'll get the motherboard over here front and center. Now we're going to have to break this seal to get this out. We've got some plastic to pull off of these cowlings. And for those that are wondering how long does it take to build a computer, about 45 minutes. This takes a little bit longer. We're going to squish this down because of everything we're going to do. But some of the things I'm explaining to you I think are important and relevant. And a lot of this information and feedback is based on you guys. I think you guys are amazing. Our goal is we want to help you to have a successful build. So this is the part I don't like, but I have to break this seal to get this out of here. We do what we do. Pop and pop. So the seal is broken. The board is out. We're going to lay this on our anti-static mat. I'm going to go ahead and pull off these pieces of plastic I've got side on this cowling. Now this cowling, which is right at the heat sink, there are a couple of little bitty fans in here, and also the Wi-Fi cards in here. Now, for those that ask me about the Wi-Fi card, I will look at the orientation, kind of like blueprints, where you look at north, calling this north the top, north, south, east, and west. I would do the same thing when I'm talking about the Wi-Fi card, when the part that stands up, because it is in a socket over here, and it is perpendicular to the motherboard. I want to turn it around with the same orientation. If you're looking at an I/O panel, that's the way you would look at the orientation. So again, the top would be north, south, east, and west. This antenna on the other motherboard is over on this side. It's on this side. Now, okay, to remove the Wi-Fi card, we've got to go through the series of screws. This board is going to be easier to deal with because to remove that Wi-Fi card, that cowling has to come off. That cowling looks like 2 screws on the back that I can get to from here. So I've got 1 screw and 1 screw. That'll get the cowling. Then I've got to pull the I/O panel off. That's 2 screws. Now, the Wi-Fi card is sitting right about here, so there's going to be 2 screws in that area. So I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws to take the back off. The back off has to come off before we can get that Wi-Fi card out and replace it. So if you don't want to do the Wi-Fi card and you want to go stock, don't worry about it. But what I'm going to do is put the CPU in first to protect that socket while I'm going back and forth. So now what this is all about, we're going to install our Threadripper. Cool. So we're going to rip our seal open. This is packaged a little differently. There's what we need. There's the torque wrench, and there's the base. If you're going to use a liquid cooler, that's the mount you're going to need. And what do we have here? Installation instructions. Good to know. Twist to unlock. Oh, there it is. I had to take the glove off. My hands was too... that's interesting. This is the second Threadripper we've built, and the first Threadripper, the way the CPU comes out of the container is really super easy. But this one, I had to take the glove off to get my hand on this to turn this, because my hand kept slipping. So once I got that loose, now I can pull this out, and there it is. That's kind of weird. So I'm gonna put my glove back on. I've got a pretty good grip, and I could not get that off. My hand was slipping too much. I thought, you got to be kidding! I got to take a wrench to this. 2950 comes out a whole lot easier. It makes more sense. So now that we've got those three connectors that are inside of here, once we were able to twist that out, now this will come right out. And there's the CPU locked down. But I could not get that off because of those three tabs with the glove on. So we will unlock the mechanism, squeeze the tabs on the side, top and bottom, squeeze those tabs to pull that out. Now, that looks more like it. So all that has got to go in right there. We'll get out our Allen wrench from the motherboard, and we'll get this out real quick. So to open, we go 3, 2, 1. So number 3, number 2, number 1. And once I've got them loosened, okay, all of them are loose. That springs up, and we're going to pull this little cap out. Now, from those blue tabs, we'll pull that lid up. We've got to slide that sled out. Once that sled is out, we're inspecting the socket. It looks okay. Die 1 and die 2 look fine. So we're going to reach over here, pop this up, slide this out, and do not touch that. So we'll slide the CPU on its mount, the orange mount, into the sled. We'll drop the sled down, and as we drop the sled down, these two blue tabs should click. There. So we'll push them down. We heard them click. Those two tabs release it, and those two tabs push it down. So the CPU is down. Now we want to go down with the lid, and we want to do the reverse. We want to close from 1, 2, and 3. So number 1, I want to get number 1 to grab. I felt it grab. Number 2, number 3. Now we'll go back to number 1, number 2, number 3, number 1, number 2, number 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's interesting, the first time we did this, we used both wrenches. The second time I'm doing this, I'm having better time with the torque wrench. So I'm just throwing that out there. 1, 2, 3. Now, when you feel like you've stopped, go all the way, because you will not over tighten it with the torque wrench. Number 1, torque. Number 2, torque. Number 3, torque. So that's the purpose of the torque wrench. It sets it according to the right pressure, so you will not over tighten it or under tighten it. If this is not torqued down correctly on these 3 screws, 1, 2, and 3, then it will affect not only your PCI slots on how they perform, it'll also affect your RAM on how it performs. And there's 2 schools of thought on the RAM when you set the speed. One, using the XMP profile, and you lock in 2 sticks at a time if you're going to 128 gigs. The other school of thought says set it manually, and there's a program you can use from Tech Power Up. I'll give you a link to it, and you can check and see what your memory timings are, and it will help you to set those timings accordingly to that program. Either way you want to go. Now for what we're doing, since this is a new platform, we're only doing 64 gigs of RAM, because either school of thought to resolve this problem on getting all the RAM installed and having it all run at the speed you want is going to require a BIOS update for device compatibility. You'll see a BIOS update for the AGESA code, you'll see a BIOS update for maybe PCI device enumeration, and you'll also see a BIOS update that will do for RAM compatibility. So anybody doing 64 gigs of RAM or less should not have any problem, but if you want to go to 128 gig, look specifically RAM that has been certified to work with the Threadripper. Otherwise, you may have some issues, and there's 2 schools of thought, and I'll put up some links on the information. So we have the processor installed. The next idea, if we want to tackle the Wi-Fi card, that can be done now, it can be done later. But I think what we need to do is go ahead and get this thing built. We need to go ahead and get our RAM installed, and then we're ready to put this in the case. And we got our boot drive to install. First boot drive, first slot. Too big for number 2 Phillips, requires a number 1 Phillips. Okay, we're going to be putting in a 2 terabyte. Nice thing about this, some people still put seals on boxes. I appreciate that. And this is the largest you can get right now. This is a Samsung 970 EVO NVMe M.2, 2 terabyte. So what we're going to do is get this out and line it up. We need to put the screw right there. So this is 2280. 22 millimeters wide, 80 millimeters long, 1 notch. So we'll set that aside for the moment. We get our screws for the motherboard. We're going to need 2 of these. And we're going to have to use jeweler screwdrivers for these. We will need 1 standoff and 1 screw. The standoff uses a straight blade. And I believe I can use a number 2 or a number 1 for that standoff. Yeah, number 1 will fit. Standoff is installed and secured. So our 2 terabyte, amazing. We're going to install, lock it in, you'll hear it lock, and then we'll pull it down, put the screw on it. And that looks like about a 2.4 millimeter Phillips. Okay, that's locked in. The heat sink, we'll remove the protective strip. That's great. The pad doesn't come off with it. Pad was loose. Okay, so we straightened the pad up. That looks pretty good. And the screw for that fastens down is already inside. So we put a standoff on, put the drive in, put the screw on the standoff, and the other standoff for the cover, this screw is already mounted, so we don't have to worry about it. So we'll lock that in, set that down. Gigabyte also has a replacement set for this. You can also get replacement sets of the thermal pads. Thermal pads are a little harder to find, but I think Silverstone has a set that'll work. You buy them in a set of 2. That drive is secure. Under there is 2 terabytes. So we have our first NVMe drive. That's the boot drive. Here you can put number 2 in, and here's number 3. Now the battery is underneath this drive. I can barely see it in the corner. It's sitting right about there. So if you ever have to replace the battery, that's where it's at. These covers don't wiggle around like they did on the X399 RS Extreme. And of course, once we power this up, you're going to see lights, LEDs, lights coming off of that. I'm not sure if there's a cover on that plexiglass. I don't think so. They've already pulled it off. But we had covers over here on these other plastic cowlings. Okay, drive is in. Now we're going to go after RAM. And the importance of the RAM all depends upon how well that CPU is torqued down. And with that CPU torqued down correctly, the RAM should work correctly, and the video card should work correctly. If your video card is running at 8x instead of 16x, that right there may be your problem, that this is not torqued correctly. Torque wrench, when you hear it click, you know it's down right. So we're now going to do our RAM. We're going to go with our sticks in order of priority. Number 1, so you have slot 1, slot 2, slot 3, and slot 4. So we'll do number 1, then number 2, and then we'll repeat the process on the other side and reverse them. Now the RAM we're going to use, this is what we're going to use for this. This is low profile Vengeance. Corsair low profile, 32 gigs. So we have 4 sticks for quad channel, and this is 3000. It's interesting how you choose your specs and what you do. If you're trying to decide whether to build a Threadripper or whether to build a Ryzen computer, definitely you want to build a Threadripper. We built a Ryzen and I really enjoyed it and loved it. Did some questions on the Gigabyte forums, on the Reddit forums, and well, for someone coming off an AMD 8350 that's been using Cyberlink, if you go to a Ryzen computer, you're going to be happy for about 6 months. Then after that, you're going to be mouth-watering for something with more power, because then you're going to want to get into something like Vegas Video or DaVinci Resolve, and then you're going to wish you'd have gone with a Threadripper. So for anybody thinking about building a computer or buying a computer, you want to think seriously for a desktop about the chipset, X399. Build a Threadripper. You'll be glad you did for later on. So we got 4 sticks, low profile. We'll check the orientation. Make sure we get these in correctly. Now I will say, when we built the first computer, I didn't realize, but that first stick of memory was not registering correctly, and I didn't know it until I went into Windows and started looking. Then I realized I didn't have that down right. These do not move. They are fixed. The locks are on the top. So I'm just checking my alignment so I can see. Here's where the notches are, and that's where the notch is on the RAM, so this is correct. But over here, what I'll need to do is turn it. And what I want to be sure I get done is this on this end goes down first. So this is the first stick, the most important stick, if you only use one stick to get the computer up. And that rear has to be locked in before you go to the front and lock that down. I heard the rear click, then I heard the front click. Now in the other video, I had a mic down here so you could hear the clicks. This, you'll just have to accept what I'm saying. Again, the orientation. making sure my notch is in the correct place. Line them up. Now I didn't hear that one click, but it looks to me like it's down like it needs to be. We're going to find out. That sure sounded loose, but it looks like it's locked in correctly. But I'm going to double check it because I'm not comfortable with that. There. I heard that click on the rear. It clicked in, so I know it's in correctly. Now I'll click the front down, and I heard it click. Okay, I'm happy. Those two should be in correctly, but when I get the system up, I'll go into the BIOS. That's the first thing I'll do is look and see if all my RAM's registering. Now I'm going to get these other two sticks in. I'm not particular about the order, but I'm going to go ahead and do those. These two are the ones that matter the most. Number 1, number 2. This is on the first die. And these other two will be on the second die. Quad channel. Again, pay attention to the orientation. These are opposite of what this side is. So the rear goes in first. Felt it click, and then it clicks. So the rear clicks in, and these are fixed, and then the front clicks in. Now for the last one. We're only using 4 sticks. We're not using 8. For those of you that want to do the 8 sticks, you're going to have some issues. 120 gigs of RAM. Try to stick with the kits that are verified and certified. And of course, your results may vary. Now, when we build a third Threadripper, we will also go up in speed. What we're doing is we're experimenting with this as we experience the technology. We want a baseline. Bottom, clicked. The top, click. So this bottom needs to click in. When you hear it click, you know you're in spot. And I'm also going to inspect it so I get an idea of close proximity as I look at that notch down there. Now, the next thing I want to do is we're going to pick this up a little bit so you can see how that RAM sits in there and get some idea of what that looks like. When this is torqued down correctly, these will perform correctly. And as you can see right here how those look, how that sits in there. So I can tell those all 4 are sitting correctly. Now when we put the cooler on, it's going to sit right between this RAM. This is low profile RAM. Low profile meaning there's not much sticking up above it. And I'll give you another side view so you can see how that's going to look before we set that in. Now, if you're coming off of something like an 8350, you can appreciate all these SATA ports on this motherboard. That's something that used to be a big deal. We wanted as many SATA ports as we could get. But in this age of new resource allocation, the SATA ports, that's history. That's not where the technology's at. And if you'll notice, 2, 4, 6, 8. Whereas on the X399 Aorus Extreme, it has 2, 4, 6. But on this X399 Designare EX, we got 2, 4, 6, 8. It's all about resource allocation. Same chipset, just the way they do things. And for those that are curious while we're here, just an FYI, and I won't get into the details too much. I will say watch the video. We've got one up on it, and that's about Thunderbolt 3. For those of you that are interested in Thunderbolt 3, even using PC Part Picker, that's one thing it won't be able to show you. I'm going to zoom in on a connector that I think you'll be interested in. For what it's worth, FYI, there are only 2 motherboards that have the GPIO 5-pin connector. As you can see, designated here is TBH_C. That's the 5-pin GPIO header. This is what I call partial support on a motherboard. There are only 2 motherboards that have this. This is on the Gigabyte X399 Aorus Extreme and on the Gigabyte X399 Designare EX. Now, on the latest, since Gigabyte has 4 motherboards on the X399 chipset, on Gigabyte's latest motherboard, which is the Pro version, oddly enough, you can see where those pins are supposed to be in the picture, and there's nothing there. So since USB 4 has been announced, this is all going to change. But as it exists right now, what I'm showing you is what I call partial support. There's 3 levels of support. Full support, partial support, and what I define as no support. The connector is what I define as partial support, and it's kind of like, how can I put this a nice way? Lipstick on a pig. Without BIOS support, that connector really doesn't do anything, because if we had the setting, for example, if we looked at an X299 motherboard, and if we had the setting that talked about force power to pin 3, that would be the same thing as on the card, on the Thunderbolt card, jumping pin 3 to 5 to force power. Well, we can't do anything in the BIOS because it's not enabled in this BIOS. So putting that on there is kind of a moot point. But if you want to do Thunderbolt, and you're bound and determined to do it, we've got a video, the first video we did about Thunderbolt 3, you might want to take a look at. It was our first experience. We're going to do another video about Thunderbolt 3. The one we have up right now is on the Titan Ridge. We're probably going to do one on the Alpine Ridge, and then we'll do a follow-up on the Titan Ridge to kind of bring everything together, because it appears most people are having better luck getting Thunderbolt 3 working on a system that has no support. And if that connector is useless, then partial support is like no support, especially if you can jump it. But we're going to go through that later. Our goal today is to get this machine built. I'm just giving you some side facts as we go through it. So hope you find that interesting. Okay, CPU is installed, torqued down correctly, NVMe drive is installed, and the memory is installed. Now we got to do the cooler. The cooler itself is kind of an interesting piece of work. Now we've done the liquid cooler, and we did that on the Ryzen. That was like building a watch. Everything has to go in just so, everything has to come out just so. For all that was involved, I'm satisfied with option 3, which is an air cooler. We're using Noctua. We've had success with Noctua before. It's working great on our first Threadripper build. That's what we're using on this one. And this Noctua, this is the NU H14S for the TR4 SP3. That's what we're going to use. So we're going to get this out of the box. Now this comes with one stock fan. We are going to put a second fan on here that we bought extra. The clip comes with it, and that's good to know for an FYI. I don't look at it as overkill because it's all about keeping everything cool. So we have the cooler that we're going to install, and we have the packet of goodies that we're going to need to get out. This will have a special Allen wrench, the thermal compound, a special cable if those that want to use it, and I would advise you against it, to control the RPMs. Let that all be controlled by the motherboard. The extra clip, so the accessories, the thermal compound, and the thermal compound is extremely important on these CPUs with their coolers, because a lot of the old processors we had, even video cards, when that thermal compound dries out, then that's not a good thing, and a lot of times you have to replace it. So this is good thermal compound. And this is the special wrench. It's got a ball end on it, and what's nice about it is once we take the fan off, when we go down on this to turn it, you can turn it sideways to get in there at an angle to get around on those fasteners. So really nice. And then there's the instructions on what to do. And the way we used to install thermal compound was we put that down and then used an old credit card to smear it out. Well, that's not the way they say to do it now. So we follow the new way, the new instructions. We'll put the little dots on and do it in the order they tell us. There's our cooler. What I'm going to do is look at this and line it up, because if you'll notice, farther apart, closer together. Closer together, farther apart. So I'm going to turn this around for the orientation. Close together, farther apart. Closer together, farther apart. Right here. Okay, we got a sock. Because what I want to do is I want to wipe off the processor top. Make sure it's clean. Now I'm going to take the cover off. Wipe this down. I'm using a sock, any kind of cotton rag you've got. I just want that nice and clean and lint free. Okay, clean. There's the two clips for the fan. There's the wrench. There's the compound. And that cable that reduces speed, which will reduce performance, we are not using. And a case badge. Now, according to the instructions on how to put this stuff down, and we will follow the instructions on putting this goop on. Now, before I get started, I mentioned earlier that this has a mount where you can adjust forward and reverse. I'm going to leave it in the stock position. I'm not going to adjust it to move it back any. I don't want it moved back. If you can see the screws right there, right in there, those can be adjusted so that this plate can be moved in relation to the cooler. I'm going to keep it stock right where it is, right in the center, and this will butt right up next to the video card. I'm okay with that, but I'm just saying if you need to, now's the time to do it. So what we want to do, wipe that down again. I can see where lint's coming to it. I want that super clean, and we will do it according to the way it talks about, and we'll lay out the thermal paste according to the patterns. We'll start with our 369 and then fill in the 4. So the first thing we need to do is check and see if this has a cap on it. And if the cap, nope, no seal. Okay, on the processor. So we'll do a dot in the center, we'll do a row across. Okay, there's our 369. And now we'll do our 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There. Done. And we've got probably enough thermal compound in there to do that again. Now I could have used the thermal compound from the other one, but I wanted to use the brand new so you can see what's involved. Now we're ready to put the cooler down. So again, we've lined up these two screws that are the farthest apart. These two screws are the closest. And again, these two screws are the closest. These two are the farthest apart. So this just flip right up. Now this fan is going to have to come off because we've got to be able to get to these screws. So I'll go ahead and pull the fan off right now. And if you notice, the orientation of that fan goes on this side, so when this comes up, it goes on that side. So it's going to blow air that direction. So we're going to lay that right like that, stand this up, and we need to go straight down and line up our holes. And we should be pretty close in our approximation. Now I can line these up, finger tighten to get started. Now I'll need to use the wrench, and this wrench has this ball on it. Lets me get in here at an angle, tighten that down. I still can get my hands in here, get these screws started. Okay, those are down, and those are down. Now according to the instructions, now that we have our screws started, and I can feel they're down pretty good, we're gonna tighten these with the wrench until they stop, not excessive force. I'm gonna start at the front. I'm giving them about a revolution each. Then I'll go to half a revolution. Oh, that one's down all the way. That one's down pretty good. That one's down pretty good. That one's down. So we'll double check. Just secure. We don't have a torque wrench for this. Be a good idea though. Just secure. Okay. Cooler's installed. Now we want to put the fan back on. And if you'll notice, we're blowing air in this direction. So we can see the label going that way. And the other fan will do the same thing. We want the label on that side so the air blows that way out the back. Now, I think what I'll do before I put this on, I want to show you what that looks like. So let me raise this up so you get an idea of what you're going to see, what you should expect to see. If you'll see the way that cooler sits in there. Now, if you're going to do all the RAM, you're going to put all 128 gigs in, you need to put the RAM in before you do this because of the close proximity of everything. When you start adding RAM or changing RAM or monkeying with the RAM, pulling them in and out, video card needs to come out. Fans need to come off for you to do this because it's pretty tight in here. I'm just saying. But I want to show you where these fans sit in proximity to this with low profile RAM. So for anyone thinking about doing this, you'll know what you're looking at. This is a lot easier to see before I put the motherboard in the case. So again, I'm picking this up, and the wire I've got facing down back at the bottom like it was, and it's going to come around and attach. I'm going to put this on, and I'm going to raise it up just a little bit because I want to just clear the RAM. Now, there's clearance here. I'm not all the way down, but when I put this on and tilt it back up, you'll be able to see it. I'm doing this to make it easy for me. And then I'll show you what you're looking at. Even though I've only got 64 gigs of RAM in here, I could put this down lower. I'm installing this as if I had 128 gigs of RAM. So I'll pick this up and show you what I'm talking about. Now, if that fan were installed the way it's supposed to be, you see there's a little bit of clearance here. It's up just a little bit. But if you'll notice on the bottom clearance, I am right above, and to give you some idea what kind of clearance we're talking about, I'm going to take this piece of paper and fold it up, and I'll show you. This folded piece of paper will slide right underneath there. So if I had 128 gigs of RAM in here, I'm clear. And if I had 120 gigs of RAM in here, I'm also clear on the top. You notice right here. This is up a little bit, but it's up a little bit. If there's another stick of RAM underneath it, it clears. You can see that. Thickness of a paper. So with low profile RAM, you can use an air cooler. If you decide to use a liquid cooler with low profile, you still got options. We like options. So the next thing we're going to do is put the other fan on the other side. But I want you to see how all that fit. Cool. Now this is the second fan we had to purchase. Again, the brackets, they come with the cooler. We had to get the second fan. That is a humongous fan. I'll put a link up to all these parts if you're interested, in case you want to do this. In this case, in case you decide to go with the Noctua. Now all those extra cables that come with it, again, that's for adjusting the speed accordingly. We're not using any of that stuff, but it's there. Only thing we need is the fan. They even include case screws. And for those wondering about your boxes and containers, keep all your packaging for 30 days because if for some reason you have to send anything back, you're going to need those containers. Keep them for 30 days or whatever the life of the warranty is. Now, I will tell you as far as a motherboard goes, if you ever send a motherboard back, they're going to send it back to you and tell you there's nothing wrong with it. So be forewarned. And I don't care what brand you're using, whether it's Asus or Gigabyte or whatever. Okay, here's the second fan. You notice the label. There is not one. There's the label. The label will face that direction, just like this fan, because we want air to go that way. So we're going to put the second fan on here. So we got to put the clips on it. And the corners are already mounted, so there's nothing we have to change. We just need to make sure those are on good. That's those little rubber mounts that keep it quiet so it doesn't rattle. We just got to get those located. So since we're going this direction, the clips go this way, so when this goes on, it'll clip that way. I have experience with that. Been there, done that, as they say. So there's the first clip, and those just sit in that little hole, whoever come up with that idea. So when that goes on, that's amazing. So simple yet so ingenious. Through the holes. Okay, we got our clips on. Now then, we'll get our fans on. I'll do the one here closest to me first. Now I'll get the one on this edge. Pretty interesting. So you can see how all that fits together. And you can see the clearance. Get those cables out of the way. You can see the clearance with the memory right here. Clearance with the memory right here. We're right above it. Just the spacing of a paper. Just clears. Okay, so primary fan and the secondary fan. Primary fan is in the rear. I strongly encourage you to download the PDF manual for your motherboard so you know the features and details. Some of that stuff is a lot easier to read and understand looking at the manual as it is opposed to looking at the motherboard. Then you can compare. For example, putting these coolers on. Now this is for the primary and this is for the secondary. So we're going to put this fan on this side on this connector, and we'll put the fan that's on this side on the second connector. And those are 4-pin fans, so they will be run by the motherboard BIOS. Okay, those headers are connected. So we should be ready now to put this in a box. Now we need to get our case up here. And we want the orientation for this, the way we're going to install it. And normally we install it top to bottom, left to right. And since we've already made our preparations, got our case ready, we've taken our fan out. So we look for our centering pin, which is right here. And cables are already loose, out of the way. So we need to put that on. And then we're going to need our screws out of this little box over here for our fasteners, so we can get our motherboard secured. So the first thing we want to do, drop our motherboard in. It's really strange, I got to say this, having the I/O panel attached to the motherboard. We've always put these in the case for so many years. It's just, it's a new animal. It's really different. And the nice thing about this, I've got room where I can touch this top and bottom to get this centered, and I will know I'm located when I hit that center pin. I'm almost there. There we go. Right on center. Now we need to find the screws and see which ones are which. Cable ties. There's an extra standoff. Based on the motherboard, all the standoffs are correct. There will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that being the centering pin, and there will be 6 and then 7. Screws for fans, screws for devices, screws for fans on the front, and these with a coarse thread and a large head. Those are a very coarse thread, fine head, and then these are a small screw with a small fine thread. These may be what they expect us to use. Let's try these. This screw will take a straight blade or a Phillips. See if I can zoom in on that. I think that's the correct screw. These screws will take a straight blade or a Phillips. I'll start with the first one we can see. Yep, that's correct. I want to get them started. Now I've got a longer screwdriver I'm going to use for the rest of these, because what I like about this longer screwdriver, it lets me get everywhere I need to be. I can get and I can clear the case so I don't have to tilt. And I want to get all these started before I get any of them set, in case I have any alignment issues, which I just did. The centering pin helps. Yep, nice. So we got the 3 on the bottom, we got the one on the edge on the right, we'll put the other one on the edge on the left, then we'll have one on the top left, and that should do it. Now, I don't think there's another top one in the center, but I could be wrong. Nope, there is not one in the top center. So for the screws on this, we have 1, 2, 3 centering pin, 4, then 5, 6, and 7. So now that those are all in, I will tighten them down. And everything at the I/O panel looks good. For those of you that decide to upgrade the Wi-Fi card, congratulations. For those of you that decide to wait, what you'll have to do is pull the motherboard out. You can leave everything connected, but you'll have to take this fan out, pull the motherboard out, and flip it over, and go through that process if you decide to upgrade it later. So it's a choice you have to make. We did it on the other motherboard. It took longer, or it took as long to upgrade that Wi-Fi card as it did to build a computer. But the point of it was, somebody asked a question, can it be done? Yes, it can, but some things you do, it's not a good idea. But if you got the time and you want to give it a shot, that's good resource management. Because one thing about the new boards is we don't have enough USB 2 ports, we don't have enough USB 3 ports. And that's a really interesting resource allocation for this board, which is the X399 Designare EX versus the Gigabyte X399 Aorus Extreme. Let me show you what I mean. On this motherboard, we have one USB 3 header and only one USB 3 header. We also have the 2 USB 2 headers. On the Gigabyte X399 Aorus Extreme, we had 2 USB 3 headers, one here and I believe one back over here. But both of these boards also have the Thunderbolt connector, which may or may not be of value. And they also have the USB-C connector, which goes to the front of the case. We have a drive bay for that. See if I can get in and show you a little bit closer. So there's our 24-pin power tap, that little connector right there. That puts USB-C to the front of the case if you got the device for it. And drive bay device, we have a video up for that tells how to do that. But there it is. And there's the Thunderbolt 3 connector for what it's worth, but no BIOS support. And then 2, 4, 6, 8 SATA power taps. And down here where we plug in our I/O, which is all the stuff on the front of the case, that's where the G connector goes. You plug all those cables together and then you plug them into this block. I always just plug them straight in. This is where you'll read your BIOS codes. And I also like to plug in the case speaker here. So the only critical thing we still need to do now is we need to get go ahead and get the case fans, which are here, installed, and we need to get these connected, which is tedious, but it's got to be done. And I'm going to go ahead and plug in the USB 2 and USB 3 headers because we're going to install Windows 10 from a USB stick, slipstreamed. Remember, slipstream. That's the easy way to do it. So we need to get the cables plugged in, get our power supply plugged in, and we'll be in business. And that's the next big thing, power supply. And if you noticed, I've waited on the power supply. The big reason for that is I wanted to have all the room I needed to do my work. I like to have room to move around in, so that's why I waited to install the power supply, G3 850. And this too has a seal on the box, which I appreciate. It's interesting, when we started working on this second machine, my first thought was, well, I'll cannibalize some of the stuff from an 8350. But there's not much you can cannibalize. I've always cannibalized cases, but I need the airflow, so that wasn't going to work. So I thought, well, the only thing left to cannibalize is the power supply, and you don't want to do that. We had a big technology change in 2012. That's when we went from BIOS to EFI to unified EFI. That was in 2012. Then in 2017 was the next big technology change, and that change involved power supplies, specifically because of hard drives. The SATA spec has changed. What I mean by that, if you use an older power supply with a brand new hard drive and it won't power up, the problem is because of the way the pinout's designed. And there's two ways you can get around it. You either take the SATA connector on the power supply, plug in the SATA changer that goes to Molex, and then change it back to SATA. That blocks that out. Or just get a new power supply. So, new power supply. Change for the sake of change. But if you have that issue and you're using an older power supply with a new hard drive, that's what's going on. So this has a seal. We will break the seal. I appreciate those seals. That shows nobody else has monkeyed with it. And again, you can use PC Part Picker to help you pick a power supply. I like the EVGA. I also like the Seasonic. It's easier sometimes to find the EVGA on sale, and a lot of times it's easier to find something bigger than what I need on sale. So, go big or go home. And for those that want to install the power supply with the fan on the outside, more power to you. There's two schools of thought on that. So for those that tell me I'm doing it wrong, I hear where you're coming from. I'm not comfortable with the space on the bottom of the case trying to blow air out. And because I'm concerned about anything overheating, I prefer to keep that power supply installed with that fan to the inside instead of that fan to the outside. So I know the difference. I'm aware of the difference. You don't need to tell me about it. So what we want to do is check our spacing. Take a look at our connectors before we get started, because our VGA, which will be VGA 1, VGA 2, and VGA 3, are going to be facing us since we're upside down, sticking out. We've got power to plug in for the main, CPU 1, CPU 2. This motherboard does not have the third PEG connector, which would plug into a device, either VGA or peripherals. So we're going to have motherboard, CPU 1, CPU 2. We'll have an 8-pin and a 4-pin. They'll come off of this. Then a VGA 1 and a VGA 2. And then, of course, the SATA devices. We will have to plug those in eventually. So set that up. Screws are in the box somewhere. I've just got to find them. I like the bag they include with the cables. It comes in handy. I'll go ahead and get all those cables out for now. Put them in this bag so that I can keep track of them. And you want to be sure and use the cables that came with your power supply and not somebody else's cables, just in case the pinouts are different. I've heard of it happening. You don't want to fry anything. Nice thing about the EVGA, everything's labeled. Here we are. Screws I was looking for. Okay, so we got 4 screws. Got to screw that down to the case. Now once we get all these screws secured, we'll get our cables in. And then once the cables are installed, then we'll be ready for, as Joe would call it, our smoke test. Power supply is secure. Now for the power tap, we'll go for the main one, which is the 24. Yeah, it's what I said. These cables are labeled. It shows this is on the G3 power supply. I like that, so I know what it goes to. SATA VGA. We have a CPU, 4 and 4, that'll be 8, and then a 4 out of this other one. Okay, go ahead and get those plugged in. Now the ones to the motherboard will route around through the back, and that's where this nice case comes in handy. Makes it easy to do that. CPU 1, CPU 2. Okay, so we're going to stand this up. Take the primary. We could take that out through the large hole in the bottom, but I'm going to take it back out through here and keep it close. What I like about this case, there's plenty of places to do stuff with. And this will come back in. It needs to come in right about here, but I could bring it in up there. If I bring it in down here, it might get in the way of the SATA cables. Up here, it could get in the way of the drives. We're going to go to the top. And these other two will also come out the back through that same hole. We'll route that one, that's number 1. We'll take that up to the top, and up here at the top, we'll route that through. And that's going to be the 8-pin. And that's going to be a little tricky, because we have to put those two 4s together. I like the fact that there's plenty of room to work in this case. 4-pin, and then the second 4-pin right next to it. Snap and snap. Didn't hear the first one snap. Apparently it did. Okay. Now this one only needs a 4-pin. This is on number 2, and the notch is toward the top, so that notch and that one doesn't get used. Pretty easy. So we got our 2 power taps to the CPU on top. Now we need to connect this one. We brought in through the top hole, which I thought made a whole lot more sense right there. And the connector is on the back side, so we'll flip this around, twist it. And even though it may interfere with I/O devices, it won't interfere with SATA cables. So I like the location on that. And that just clipped right in. A lot of times that 24-pin cable is in a bad place, but I can live with that. Okay, good. Now we've got our I/O cables here to deal with, and I think instead of bringing them in through that hole, if we can bring them in a little further down, if they'll reach. So what I want to do is stand this up. These cables right here, we are going to move them. Let's see if we can move them down. Ideally, if they will reach right here, that would be ideal for the cleanest installation. So let's see what we've got. Not long enough. Bummer. Those cables are tied off, so I need to get them separated from the back side. Let's see what we're dealing with here. I need all those to give me as much length as they can. There. Now those are tied and tied. That's interesting. They've tied those to the front. There's a tab. That tab would have been a smarter tab to have tied them to. That would have given me more length. But I can work with it. So let's get those all separated. Those are our I/O cables to the front. And these are USB 2, USB 3, and audio. So those can go down there. So we're not going to have any choice. We're going to have to take these in right here because of where they're plumbed. They need to be just a wee bit longer. So with that and that, this should be good. We can tie those down. I'm not going to use a zip tie yet. I'm just going to use a tie in case I change something. And these are the ties that came on the cables with the power supply. A little extra time spent now getting these cables organized makes a cleaner installation. Some people spend hours doing this. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back up, see what we have on the other side. Okay, yeah, that's going to work. It sure looks like that should have worked down there, but the one cable that's too short in here that goes to the front of the case is the reset switch. It's got to come straight in. So close, but yet so far. Okay. The rest of them might reach. As far as that goes, we could take these down one more. So that's where the SATA cables need to be, but I'm okay with that. Okay. So let's take this back down. So now we have all these cables here. We've got these. So our HD audio will go over here. One blanked pin, that'll be easy to do. Plug that in. That'll reach with the label facing down toward the bottom. One pin blanked out so we don't get it wrong. USB 2 header, we'll plug in the first USB 2 header. And again, one pin blanked out, label reading to the bottom. And if you're going to plug in a Thunderbolt, you'll need that other USB 2 header. Of course, with USB 4 coming out, that's all going to change. But with USB 4 coming out, you're still going to have a PCI Express 3.0 by 4 slot. So, and the last one will be this USB 2 header. 19 pin, it's keyed. Flip that around, plug it in, done. Okay, so got all 3 of those. Now we got to go after the I/O. The easiest way for me to deal with that I/O stuff is I look at the manual, the PDF manual, and set it up according to that because it's a whole lot easier to read. So I've got the color block I can look at, page 31. We're going to need a speaker. So we have our speaker cables. So we have our case speaker bag. We're going to pull one of those out. So when we bought this kit, we bought a pack of 10. I like to hear that motherboard report that beep. Used to always get these with cases. A few cases didn't have them. Now none of them have them. Okay, so we're going to put this on. That'll be first. And that will go speaker cable, red being positive, to the left. That'll go on top. That'll go in this connector here. Let's zoom in on that so you can see if you can get you a better picture of it. That looks pretty good. Okay, so that first one, and I could do all this with the G connector, but I'm going to do it this way. So that's the first one. So then the second one we'll do will be the, well, let's see where our cables are, what we pick up first. Hard drive LED, power switch. Yeah, that's kind of important. We'll do the power switch. Okay, the power switch is top left power LED, then right next to that is the power switch. So this is the power switch, and if the print is the positive, we'll plug that in accordingly. That'll plug in on the second two on top. Now we need the two for the power LED. And that would be, there's hard drive. Those two are power LED. Okay, one is positive and one is negative. Power LED to the left is positive, so these are two separate blocks. So those two together will go on 1 and 2 at the top left. Maybe easier to do them one at a time. 1, have a nice fit to them. And number 2. Okay, those are down good. Now on the bottom, we have bottom left hard drive LED. So let's grab that. Bottom left hard drive LED, print positive. So that will go to the left bottom. Done. We have one left, and that would be the power switch. Kind of important. And the power switch, that's the wrong one. Well, that's the reset switch. Power switch goes to the top. Yep, power switch to the top. We've got 1 and 2 top left. And right next to that will be power switch. Power to the left. And then the reset switch. And the reset switch is on the bottom right next to the hard drive LED. So 1 and 2 is hard drive. Number 2 and 3 is reset. And the reset switch has it reversed. Power is on the right. Power will be where the print's at. So we'll turn that around and put that on number 3 and 4 on the bottom left. Okay, so everybody's plugged in. The only thing left would be chassis intrusion, and you've got that other power LED where you can do 1, 2, and 3 on the bottom. So I've got power LED on the top left instead of the bottom right. Chassis intrusion detection, that's usually something you see on a rack mount case. So now that we got our cables plugged in, I'm going to do an inventory right check. This is just for my own personal benefit. CPU is installed, torqued down correctly. Primary NVMe drive is installed. We have 4 sticks of memory installed, actually 32 gigs, but 4 channel. CPU coolers installed, fans are in, Wi-Fi, whether you upgraded that or not. We'll go through the inventory. Got the power supply installed. We have the primary and secondary power supply. Actually, the primary, the 24 pin, and then the primary and secondary for the 2 optional, which is the 8 pin and the 4 pin are installed. We have the connectors to the front of the case, to the front panel, as well as the audio. We have the USB, USB 2, and the USB 3 header. We'll do the USB-C when we do the drive bay device. So now, and we've got the 2 fans plugged in for power. So now we need to install the video card, and the video card is going to require 2 power taps. So 2 power taps, let's see for the video card. VGA, 2 power taps. Okay, got those where I can find them. So now I think we're ready to install our video card. And then we'll be ready to go to the next step. The smoke test, as Joe called it. Wish Joe was here to see this. Okay, the video card we're installing, this is an AMD Radeon Pro WX7100. So same thing we put in the Ryzen. And in the first Threadripper, we used the 9100. We may talk some more about the video cards later. I'm surprised there aren't more people using these. The video drivers are bulletproof, but for whatever, we're going to get this installed. No seal on the box. It will be in an anti-static bag. There we go. Well, this is a little bit different packaging than the other one had. Cheaper bag for one thing. Wow, there's the video card. We'll set that down. There's the manual and the literature. We'll go ahead and pull that out. The other Radeon cards had better packaging. They've really kind of cheapened this down. Now there's a bracket here to put on the back of the video card we won't use and won't even bother getting into it. That other connector is there for the video card if you need it. Okay, the cables we've got included this will allow us to go from DisplayPort to DVI. There's actually 2 of those. Wow. The other cards included a whole lot more connectors. They included not only DisplayPort, but mini DisplayPort. This one just has 2 DisplayPort to DVI. Since we got to take everything to HDMI, I won't be using those much. But they're there. And the connector that's here that goes on the back of the card, I'm not going to get it out of the box. It's if you've got a real long video card in a big case. I haven't seen stuff like that used in ages, and these cards are not that heavy. And this is the other connector that goes to the multi-pin header and goes out the back. That's also included. If anybody wants details on what that is, I think I talked about it in the other video. Now the important part, the video card itself. Now that's in a bag with an inner bag. Curious. And it's got a seal on the bag. Good to see that. Had me worried for a minute. So we're going to break the seal. And that is the Radeon Pro WX7100. Now I don't want to touch the edge connector, but I do want to peel this plastic off. And I have 1 power tap, 1 6-pin. The 9100 had to have 2 power taps. I believe it was either a 6 and an 8 or 2 6s, I'm not sure. Cooling solution looks similar. It's got 1 fan on it, and the purpose of the fans we're doing in the case is to keep this video card cool. Not so much for the CPU. We got that covered. And it's got a multi-pin header if you're going to do 2 of these, and the other little 3-pin header to do the other little connector. We won't be using that either. Not even going to put it in. So we're going to line this up and make sure we're a single slot solution, and we are. So we're going to remove one of these, and this video card is a single slot solution unless you use the other connector. Okay, video card's in. There's still clearance between the video card and the cooler. Okay, now we can go ahead and put one of those fans while we're at it in the front. This will get us one of our Noctua fans in front of the case. Now before we install that, I'm going to double check. Okay, it's interesting. Black fan. To install this fan, they've included chrome screws. So I'm going to use the black screws that came with the case to put that fan in. Minor detail. Okay, here's our fan. Now we have our screws out, the black screws we're going to use that came with the case, and that's the back, that's the front, so fan will be blowing that way, so all of these fans will be blowing that way. So I'm going to take the wire on this and route it toward the bottom, and I'm going to have to look at the orientation on how I want to set that. We have fan sockets, let's see, we have fan sockets 1 and 2 right up in here on the top right corner, and then we have a system fan pump header right here, but the other case fan headers may be down here on the bottom, 1 and 2. So we have system fan 2 and 3 at the top. Oh, there's a system fan 1 right in the middle by the memory. I didn't see that. Wow. But that system fan is already plugged in with fans, so we can't get that header because those fans are being used under that cowling. So that's system fan 1. Make note of that when we're in the BIOS. So system fan 2 and system fan 3 are top right, which puts system fan 4 and system fan 5 pump on the bottom right down here. Okay, so 2 fans on the front. We're going to decide where we're going to plug them in, and the fan up here, because we may put 2 fans in the top later on. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right now we're going to have 1, 2, and 3 because we will swap those out. So number 1, probably these 2 to the top, 1 and 2. So this needs to go wherever the cable will reach, and it might go to 1 and 2, system fan pump number 6. So we do fan 2 and fan 3 to the top. We use it system fan pump number 6, which is right next to the CPU, to go to the rear of the case. Then we can use the 2 on the bottom to go to the front of the case. So a little bit of planning. So this will be system fan 6 that we're going to plug into. I just want to double check and make sure we've got cable to reach. So with this over here and the cable going across the top, that'll gladly reach. Okay, so we'll go ahead and attach this. I like to double check. So we'll just put this up here. Larger fans, less noise, more air. So we'll get our holes lined up. And boy, that is sitting right on top of that cowling. I'm putting the fasteners on crisscross, so I get a hole lined up, crisscross line the other up, so the other two should be in line. So far so good. Now when we first turn this on, these fans are going to be loud when it starts up until we go in there and adjust them. And probably for the thermistors, the two places you'd think would be the hottest, maybe near the RAM or the CPU, or maybe near the video card, or maybe near an I/O card, like if you have a RAID array card installed. Having those thermistors, those kind of nice. Okay, rear fan's installed, and we're going to put that on the header, which goes to the back of the board, which is called System Fan 6 Pump. And if we have to change it later, we can change it later, because we're going to save the two for the top for two top fans that we'll put in later. Done deal. We're in pretty good shape now with what we've done. The other cables we need to do for the drives and things we can mess with later. We just want to get the basics up, and that's important to remember when you're building a machine. Keep it simple. We've got just the basics that we need in here, and then we can add the other stuff and change things later, because if you have to diagnose something, then you have to start taking things out, and keeping it basic like this keeps it simple. Because the next step is, once we get this up, we'll go into the BIOS, and once we're in the BIOS, we'll check a few things like memory, look at some of the goodies in the BIOS, and then we want to get started with Windows with our slipstream. So hope you enjoy this. So we should be good to go. We've got our USB hooked up so we can use that. So what I'm going to do, I need to go ahead and get all these cables out of the way, because we need to be able to stand this up so you can see what's going on. Hook up a monitor so we can both see what's going on. And I've got to hook up a monitor and a converter. So I've got all my SATA cables in a bag so I can easily find them. I like those bags, and I will be needing those later. And the power cable. Larger power supplies typically have a larger power cable. Okay, VGA, we'll go to VGA number 1. VGA 1. We'll route that out the back. We'll bring that back in right up here at the top, and then that will give us power to the video card that's routed out the back. Least obtrusive. Video cards installed, power taps installed for the video card. Okay, now we're ready to power up, do the smoke test. Computer is on, powering up for the first time. The BIOS should reset itself since we have a different CPU in. We'll listen for the beeps if we hear any, and then we should be able to go right into the BIOS. One beep, that should boot it. Smoke test. Now we're powering up. We'll go right into the BIOS. Press the delete key on the BIOS, and that's what you should expect to see. BIOS has been reset. Please reconfigure your BIOS setup items if needed. Say OK. We're in BIOS, and the first thing I'm going to do is over here on the right-hand side. This is going to go away in just a second, but it shows the voltage of the memory and the quantity. So 32768. So we are running 32 gigs. So let's go take a look at memory settings. And it's set for auto. Let's see if we can do the XMP profile and see if it will clock correctly. Escape. Then we will go look at the smart fan settings. Right now we're only controlling one fan. Well, the CPU fan, the secondary CPU fan. But fan number 6, we're controlling that. And it's on the rear. It's running pretty quiet. Two front fans are pretty quiet too, but we're not controlling those. They're just running. So I like to look at that. System, BIOS F11. According to Gigabyte, we are running the latest BIOS F11. So that's good to know. That came out 10/12 of 2018. So, and that updated the EVGA code. The EVGA code before that, F10, updated the Ryzen Threadripper CPU for 2nd generation. And the one before that added NVMe RAID support and Ryzen Master support. We're running the latest F11 BIOS, so we can run the latest CPU 2nd generation, but we're running a 1st generation CPU. So we're going to go back into the BIOS and keep going. But it's always good to check. So we're running F11. BIOS, boot priority, our Samsung 970 EVO 2 terabyte, that's correct. Now later when we start messing around with stuff, the CSM support will turn off when we turn on RAID. We're not doing that right now. We just want to get this up and running, and we're just looking. Display, PCI slot 1. Everything is turned on. RGB off when everything is off. The rear DAC, normal use. LAN controller 1 and 2 is on. Audio is enabled. NVMe configuration, chipset. And that's where we would set bandwidth for slots. Number 1 is 16. Number 2, That's where we'd bifurcate that if we were using an NVMe card. And then either number right here by 8 number 1 or down here by 8 number 2, either one of those could handle the Thunderbolt card if we chose to do that. And right now SATA is AHCI, that's good. NVMe RAID mode is disabled, that's good. And if we decide to do a RAID card, that's right where we'd change it. And each one of these changes you do in the BIOS to enable that. We've got a video up on that. So right now I'm good to go. The only thing I changed was memory, and I went to the XMP profile. So with the speed we're doing, the XMP we're setting, we should be ready to go. So we're going to do a save and exit, and when we do, now we need to be ready for the next step. On this little stick is Windows 10 that we've downloaded, the ISO, and we've slipstream Windows, and we've got that on Builder Bio. You can take a look at that video on how to slipstream those drivers. So we're going to get that ready. So the next step is going to be to install Windows. Let's see how that goes. There is no network connection, so that it will not ask us to be at the account, because when we install this, I want to do a local account, and we won't have to be worried about trying to do updates right now either. But let's just go the process. So save and exit, F10, yes, yes, and away we go. Gigabyte, now we're getting ready to boot. We'll see if we boot to the memory stick, and we should be ready to install Windows. Yep, we see the hourglass going up, so that's getting started. Remember, we didn't change anything in the BIOS, so we're going to go through this real quick, install, and this should all be pretty straightforward and automatic. And this is downloading the Windows 10 ISO to a USB stick and then slipstreaming. We're not going to put a key in, I'll deal with that later. Accept EULA, good old EULA, and we're going to do a custom install Windows only. We're not doing an upgrade. And we're going to tell it next. Now, if you were doing RAID and you want to install Windows on the RAID, this is what you have to do at this point. This is where you have to tell it the controller. This has been this way since Windows 95. The way Windows sees the drive will depend upon the way it sees the controller. Windows has to see the controller to see the drive on the controller. So if you're going to install RAID, this is where you install your RAID drivers if you're installing to a RAID. Now when we do RAID, I'm not interested in a boot RAID. That's why the video we did I think is really, really important. We're using the RAID drive as a scratch drive, as a media drive for rendering. So to do that, you have to install it manually. But this is where you would install it if you're trying to do RAID for the install to have Windows on a RAID drive. So at this point, we'll just go ahead and say keep going. It'll do what it needs to, and we're in business. How you will know this is successful is when it is finished, because at some point when it starts pulling those drivers off that disk, Windows will go bonkers. And we didn't do any of the stuff in the sheet that Gigabyte had with the motherboard. All you need to do is slipstream the drivers into Windows for the Wi-Fi, which is what we've done. Whether you upgrade the Wi-Fi card or not, it's still beneficial. So we'll know we're successful when this is done. Now while Windows is installing, I do want to point out it's interesting the way the Designare EX is set up for the Wi-Fi for the connectors on the card versus the way the RS Extreme is set up. The connectors are different, and I find that really, really fascinating. So if you have to get a different antenna, I'll put a link up to an antenna that includes all the connectors you need so that it can go either way. But I wanted to mention that little tidbit of information. So right now Windows is set up. We're getting ready to restart. So we're going to restart and let's see what happens. We hear the beep. This is restart step 1. We're installing Windows 10 64-bit. I do want to mention at this point while we're installing Windows, again, we're installing Windows without a key. You can purchase a key from someplace like SCD Key. There's a link we used to put up that worked. They've taken that link down, and if you do a search, you'll never find it. But you can go to scdkey.com, register at their site. They will then send you links on how to find software other than just game stuff. It's a good price. The other option you have is, well, search around. You can find a good price on a key. And I will say that those of you that have either the TechNet, the old TechNet that's now gone, or if you had Microsoft Action Pack, those keys will still work. So that's a key that I will use. But when they cease to work, then we'll explore other options. But I want to mention that to you. Now the point of following through with this is we want you to see Windows installed on here completely, because once Windows is installed, then you know you're good to go. And right now the problem is that Windows does not like the Wi-Fi card on these motherboards, whether you use the card that's there or whether you upgrade. So if you will slipstream those Windows drivers, piece of cake. Extremely important. Now this is usually the place where Windows will go bonkers on you. If we've made it this far, then we're in good shape. United States, US, no keyboard, we'll skip. Connect to the network. It sees our wireless. No. We're going to skip that for now. I don't even have the antennas hooked on there. Connect now to save time later. Nope, we're going to do a local account. I think a local account's safer. And who's going to use this? And I'm not going to do a password. It's too easy to crack it. I've had too many of those I've had to reset passwords on. Cortana, not interested. Do more with more activities. Do I want to do this? Nope. All this other stuff I can turn off later. I'll go ahead with it for now. Hi. We're getting everything ready for you. Oh boy. This might take several minutes. Don't turn off your PC. Amen to that. Ought to make that as wallpaper on a computer. Almost there. Done. Searching for drivers. Now at this point, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to install the drivers. I'll do them from the motherboard. I can put a drive in here and pull that. After I've done the motherboard drivers, then I'm going to go to AMD's site, download the X399 chipset drivers, get that squared away. And the third thing I'll do is I'll download and install the video drivers for our video card. Then we'll be in business. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll power down. Let's see, we're going to need a power tap. Then we will need a drive cable. And those should be in here. Now we're going to install the drivers. I'm also going to install the network so we can download the X399, but when I do, Microsoft's going to take over and they're going to lock it where I can't change the desktop, which is fine. But they're going to keep telling me that I need to put a key in, which I'll deal with that later. But I want to download those drivers unless I put them on a memory stick, so I'm just going to pull them straight into the machine. So back into Windows we go. Blu-ray drives installed and connected. One power tap, one SATA connection. Back into Windows. Pretty quick boot. Sees the network. Do you want to allow this to be discoverable on your network? Yes, we do. So, first time seeing this computer on this particular router. There's other network stuff we'll do later. We're going to get our drivers installed. Okay, run.exe. Okay. Figure out what it is they want. Now we're going to install the drivers right quick. This is important. Step 1, Step 2, and then Step 3. Resolution's jumping according to what it sees that's installed for the video card. I'm going to uninstall, remove all these extemporaneous things. All we want are chipset. AMD chipset driver, Sound Blaster, Realtek audio driver, the Intel software connection. We don't have to have that. That puts in about, wow, 151 megs worth of stuff. We don't need that. The Wi-Fi driver, we've already done that. And the Intel Bluetooth driver, we've already done that too. Because if we were to go over to Start, Pause, Break, and look at Device Manager, we have Bluetooth already there. Bluetooth is already there because we slipstream the drivers. And the Wi-Fi, there it is. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are already there, so we don't have to worry about that. So I just want to zoom in and show you. But getting this far, we're a success. But we got to get these chipset drivers installed. So Bluetooth, nope. Wi-Fi, nope. Intel connection software, nope. We're looking for three things: the chipset driver, the Sound Blaster driver, and the Realtek audio driver. Even if we use a Pro Audio interface, so we'll do Express install. We'll still have all that stuff working like it needs to. We recommend you install the drivers and software listed below for your motherboard. Please click Express install. We did Express install, but we just unclicked the stuff we didn't want. So the first thing we're getting is the chipset driver for the X399. Then when we get through, it's going to want us to reboot. Then we'll go download the new drivers. Now, while we're doing this in the background, and while Microsoft is monkeying with this machine, Windows is restarting right now. They're going to take control, and if we can't finish what we're doing, it's because they're installing stuff, and their stuff takes priority. So nothing you can do about it. Just don't plug the connection in and pull the drivers from another machine. But it's part of the process. You have to do it. So we're doing it. So as soon as we get back into Windows, we'll continue the process. Heard it beep, coming back up. I like to hear that PC speaker beep. I'm not looking at codes. It's important to know I'm listening to the beeps. And for what it's worth, there are no BIOS codes other than 00 on the motherboard. So don't think you can see it from here. But okay, we're back into Windows. Let's see if the process will continue automatically. It should. AMD Ryzen, Express install. I'm doing this and going through the process, so for those of you that have never built a computer, or if you've never built a Threadripper, you'll understand. It's not rocket science. There's nothing complicated, but we thought this might help. So now we're installing the Sound Blaster drivers. The video may blink again on us. I don't know until we get all these chipset drivers installed. Finished install, please reboot. So we'll do that. So while Windows reboots, didn't do it manually. It didn't do it automatically, so we'll do it manually. We can restart. Now once we go to restart and we see on the start menu about updates, then we're out of control. Microsoft has taken over the machine. Nothing we can do till they get finished. But they don't have it yet, so we'll see if we can keep going. I hear the beep. We're booting. Back up to the BIOS screen. Back into Windows. Beautiful display. I'm going to go back over to Device Manager and see if it's finished its little trick. We had one more to install. Okay, it hadn't finished yet. So let's zoom in on that and see what we're looking at. Okay, that's Creative Technology. Connection service. Allow connection service to communicate on private networks. That's interesting. I never noticed that. I'm okay with that. I may find out later I'll do otherwise. I don't know if that's reporting back to Creative or if that's trying to check for updated drivers. If it's reporting back to Creative, my concern is we can start seeing a bunch of silly ads. We'll see. Okay, that step is done. So I'm going to go back into Device Manager. Start, pause, break. That's not the only way to get there. It just happens to be the way I get there. Bluetooth looks good. Storage controllers look good. USB looks good. And system devices, there's no errors right now. So we're good on our drivers. We're as good as we can be right now until we go out and get the good stuff. So I'll use Internet Explorer to go out and get our drivers. I'm not a fan of Edge, but that's just me. This is one little annoyance that I'm going to take care of with Nanite right now. I changed my browser to Firefox. That's my comfort zone. And then we'll do Save As, because I save all this stuff. And for now, the default location is fine. And we will run. So we're going to install Nanite. Actually, we're installing the installer that Nanite runs to install the browser, Firefox. Once Firefox is installed, then we'll go get our drivers. I'm just picky. Close that. And there's our icon on the desktop. And if I get this done before Microsoft catches me, nope, won't let me do the themes. I can't get my stuff on the desktop. Activate Windows now. Unless, it will let me get my icons. Okay, good. Should have done that before I ever plugged in. Okay, there's my icons on the desktop. Okay, I'm going to go Start Control Panel. We'll go to Control Panel. I'm going to change my view right quick. Large icons. And I want this to work like a web page. So I will go to File Explorer Options. Over here. Single click. Okay. I like that. Now, Firefox, here we go. Don't want to see that. What I want to see is what I'm looking for. X399 chipset drivers. And search for results for X399. You can do the TR4. I'm going for the X399 chipset drivers. And Windows 10 64-bit. It sees what we're running. And all I need right now are the chipset drivers. So we will download that. Download. Save the file. And we are getting version 18.10.10.18. Save it. Show me the download. Execute. Yes. And this will go to the default C drive. If we had the other drive installed, we wouldn't be doing this to the NVMe drive. But until we get the other drives up, this is the only drive in the machine. Accept and install, like we have a choice. Current version 16.6. Let's see what the new version is going to be. 18.10 local driver. So we'll go with that. Let's do an express install. We need everything they've got. Don't need to look at it. I know what it's all about. AMD Radeon software, AMD Radeon Pro. It's interesting how they've tailored the installation. 1810 driver has been installed. Outstanding. Now we're going to need to restart. Before we do, what I want to do is go back over and we're going to do a search for the AMD Radeon WX 7100. And there, I believe, is our video driver. Drivers and support, either spot. We'll go down here to the bottom, drivers and support. Windows 10 64-bit. Pro software for enterprise. This is version 19Q11. 326 megs, release date 2/20/2019. We'll download that. Save it. I'm not interested in signing up right now. I've done that before. And they're real funny how that shows up. If you're not running the right resolution that they like, it will not show up. Because once I get this installed, I'll change the size of the fonts. I don't run it at 100%. I usually run it at 150%. And there's the drivers. Okay, we need to reboot before we go any further. So we'll close all that down. And let's restart, and then we'll come back and do the video. Okay, we've installed the first set of drivers from the motherboard. We've installed the second set of drivers, download the X399 chipset. We're rebooting. Now we're going to do the third set of drivers, which will be for the video card that we've already downloaded. We'll just go in and start and go after it. And hopefully we'll get ahead of what Microsoft is going to try to do since we're now online. So stay with us. I'm hoping all those little tidbits of information will help you in what you do to decide to build, because I really think it's really important and relevant that you be on the right chipset, and the X399 is the platform to be on. And you can use PC Part Picker and make all kinds of optional choices. Back in Windows. Okay, now we're going to go install those drivers. All right, Windows 10 64-bit Radeon Pro Enterprise. And install. It'll go to the C drive. No other place for it. We've been using the Radeon Pro WX video cards, like I said, ever since we started using the Ryzen, and I've been pleased with it. I think it's bang for the buck. The drivers have been bulletproof. But for those of you that are using NVIDIA, more power to you. All of the GPU accelerated software wants and requires NVIDIA. So I understand that. But it's just, for me, hard to justify bang for the buck when I can do what I need to with this. So accept and install. We'll do an express. I don't need to do a custom. I've looked at it before. I want them to do what they need to do. Please wait while we detect hardware. 1%, 13%, 23%. Things go pretty quick when you're on an NVMe drive. And this is a 2 terabyte drive. Anybody building a Threadripper, whether you use a Radeon card or whatever, I would strongly encourage you, the X399 chipset, whichever motherboard you choose, I would strongly encourage to use at least a 1 terabyte NVMe drive for the boot drive. And from there, your options are wide open. If you're trying to keep it on a real tight budget so that you can upgrade, get into a good platform, then you can change things later. For example, if you need to keep the RAM low, you could go with dual channel and do 2 sticks. You can always add 2 more of the same brand, same specification later on, so that you can get 4 channel. But if you can at least get a good motherboard and get that foundation, then get a decent CPU, get enough RAM to get that thing up, you can add RAM later. So I'm just saying. Okay, and it wants to restart, so we'll do that. So that was step 3. You can see how quick and easy this is when you do it the easy way. We like to keep things simple. And slipstream in Windows, I can't emphasize that enough. That's the easy way to go. Once you've got that disk with those drivers, and you can do anything with a slipstream, you can slipstream applications. It's a pretty straightforward process, but once you understand the concept, then it's easy to replicate it. Now we go back into Windows. And I just want you to see we've had no blue screens with this. Everything has just been 1, 2, 3. Back in. And thank you for installing. I don't need to do that. I've done that before. So we're going to go to Device Manager right quick. And it looks like all of our drivers are good to go. Bluetooth, Intel Wi-Fi Bluetooth is there. That's good. Our display adapter, we're running the current driver. Our chipset system devices are all good to go. And this tree is a little bit overwhelming when you look at it, but everything there looks good. There's no question marks. And this step of getting the correct and current chipset drivers installed is extremely important for that Thunderbolt 3 to work. So right now everything is good to go. All the steps we've shown you are bulletproof. I hope you found this helpful. That's how we build a Threadripper. Again, this is our second Threadripper. If we do a third Threadripper, we'll wait till some of the newer technology comes out. But right now is a great time to be building a computer. And if you're going to buy a computer, think about how many cores you're getting. More cores, the better, even on a laptop. So this is Builder Buy. My name's Gil Boyd. Thank you for joining us. You guys are great. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.